In this tutorial about the HOME Cost Allocation Tool, we will introduce the Excel workbook that makes up the tool and explore the Selection of Method worksheet. CPD Notice 16-15 outlines three potential methods of cost allocation: the standard method, the proration method, and the hybrid method. There are several factors that drive the decision about which method of cost allocation to use. As we discussed in the prior segments, the determination of unit comparability is the first factor. When units are not comparable, the standard method of cost allocation must be used. But when units are comparable, a PJ can potentially choose from the other methods. The next factor in selecting the cost allocation method is which direction we're reviewing the project from. Are we starting with a proposed level of home investment? For example, a developer has requested $1 million in home funds, and trying to determine how many of the project's units must be designated as home assisted. We talk about this as the dollars to units path, and that's the most common approach. In this case, if the units are comparable, we can still use the standard method, which is acceptable in all cases, but we also have the option to use the proration method. Alternatively, in some cases, we may be going in the other direction, what we refer to generically as the units to dollars approach. Perhaps we don't yet know how many dollars the project needs, but instead we know that a developer is proposing to designate a given group of units as home assisted and wants to know how much home funding could be provided in exchange for those units. Remember, PJs are still required to underwrite the project and can never provide more home funds than are needed. So even when using the units to dollars approach, that doesn't always mean that the full cost of the designated units can necessarily be awarded. When the units are comparable and we're going from units to dollars, then all three options are potentially on the table. Finally, remember that a PJ has choices in its local program design. A PJ could require the use of the standard method in all cases. There's never a requirement to use either the proration method or the hybrid method. Or a PJ could require the dollars to units approach and just not entertain a scenario where the developer is basically saying, "How much will you give me for 7 units?" The point is that just because HOME gives PJs multiple options and flexibility, PJs have the right to be more restrictive in their local program design. And sometimes choosing to implement a smaller set of options reduces the administrative burden of running the program. As we noted in the introduction, in practice, we believe that most PJs will use the dollars to units approach, and most projects, therefore, will either use the standard method or the proration method. Before we get into the spreadsheet itself, there are a few starting tips to cover. The file is an Excel workbook which contains several different linked worksheets. It's always a good idea to start with a clean copy of the tool for each project, rather than opening up the copy from the last project you worked on. This will help you avoid having leftover data from your prior project accidentally carry over into the new one. For each project, only 2 worksheets will be completed: the Selection of Method worksheet, and then the method-specific worksheet that you've selected for that project. The cells in the worksheets are color-coded to help guide you. Yellow cells are for data entry, while the white cells contain formulas. And to limit opportunities for corrupting the formulas, the worksheets have been protected, but there's no password, so advanced users can unlock the sheets if they need to. With that, let's take a look at how we would fill out the Selection of Method worksheet. For this example, we'll use Case Study C from the segment on unit comparability, and in the next segment on the standard method worksheet as well. When you first open the file after downloading it and saving it to your own machine or your own network drive, the page that should come up to is the General Instructions. So we see the various pages across the bottom. A couple of quick reminders: every project will include the Selection of Method worksheet, but only one of the specific worksheets based on the different cost allocation methods will be used per project. We will only enter data in yellow cells. Everything else is locked so that we can't accidentally delete the formulas. So we're going to look, we see the Selection of Method page, the standard method page, the proration, another proration which we'll talk about later, and the hybrid. Starting with the Selection of Method page, you're going to see a lot of commonalities among the functionality. Again, yellow cells are for entry, so we're going to say Case Study C, 123 Main Street, somewhere. And let's just say that today is the 25th of May. Depending on the size of your screen, you may or may not see the instructions that are over to the right, so we have a reminder here for you. But if you scroll over a little bit, we have a box that shows you line by line instructions and explanations, and this is true of each of the different worksheets. So it helps you as you're filling it out, but it will not print for you just to save paper every time. So if you recall, we're going to go back to case study C, which we talked about in the comparability segment, and you're going to have to trust me on some of the information, but this was a 56 total unit project. We had 27 ones, 25 twos, and 4 3-bedroom units. So we see where that is 56 units. We're just going to label those as 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and we have 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3 bedrooms. The 1-bedrooms all have 1 bath, the 2-bedrooms actually vary, and the 3-bedrooms all have 2 baths. Again, you're going to trust me on the square footage here, but the average square footage of a 1-bedroom unit was 583. 927 square feet is the average for the 2-bedroom units, and 1,142 for the 3-bedroom units. Now we go to our comparability determination, and as you recall, this is something the computer doesn't do for us, but we do record our answers. The 1-bedroom units, in terms of the number of bedrooms and bathrooms, was generally comparable, but the overall configuration of the units was somewhat different. So we're going to say yes in terms of the number of beds and baths, but that the overall configuration and layout was problematic, so we're going to say no. The square footage, as we remember, was substantially different from unit to unit, and so they are not comparable. However, the fit and finish was generally comparable from unit to unit. Unless we say yes to all 4 of these tests, we have to determine that the units are not comparable. Well, let me show you one thing real quick right now. What you see is we've entered units. We have a number of units of type A, but we've not yet made a determination of comparability. So the spreadsheet shows us this error off to the right-hand side in red, just to give us a reminder that we need to either make the determination, and we're going to say no, these units are not comparable, or we need to remove that tranche of units. So it's just a way, if you've opened up the sheet with some junk data left over from a prior project, to avoid that. With our 2-bedroom units, again, we don't even have comparability in terms of the number of beds and baths, because some of these have 2 beds and 1 bath, some have 1.5. Their configuration is also substantially different. The square footage is different, but the finishes and amenities are the same. Again, we answer no. And in our 3-bedroom units, the bedrooms and bathrooms are in fact reasonably consistent with one another. The configurations are not. The square footage actually is, and the fit and finish is as well. However, again, we've determined that the units are not comparable. So what we see down here is that the determination is not comparable. The only time that this will show comparable is if you've entered yes in this column to each individual tranche or grouping of units. So just to show you, if we say yes, yes, and yes, one other thing that this just shows us, if I type the answer wrong, it's going to tell me it's not matching the data validation. I'm only allowed to enter yes or no, and so again I'm going to type yes. I can't say maybe. And now, because each individual grouping of units have been determined to be comparable, then the units are comparable in this sense. So again, you can have some user error here, but we want to make sure that you've got an opportunity to understand what you're showing. One other thing to point out is that the calculated gross residential square footage, this is the square footage of all of the different units put together, is calculated here in row 15, and that will carry over. Now, the other thing that we need to talk about is what is our starting point. The most common starting point to cost allocation is a known amount of home investment. We've determined, for example, that we'd like to award $1.2 million in home to this transaction, and we're trying to determine how many units we need to designate as home assisted in order to justify that investment. In certain circumstances, we may in fact go the other way, and that's where this cell comes in terms of identifying the starting point. In some cases, what we find is that we've got the drop down and we say we're starting from a proposed unit designation. We have a set of units that we have determined will be the home units, and we're trying to determine the cost of those units. And so what I want you to notice now is something that's going on below here. We're choosing our cost allocation method because we're not going from funding to units. These are grayed out because we're going from units to funding, and because our units are not comparable, the only option we have is the standard method. Let me just briefly show you. Had we said yes all the way down the board and had comparable units, what you see is we have the option of the standard method, the proration method, or the hybrid method, all which can work starting from a group of units and determining the funding. On the other hand, if we have comparable units and we're starting from the known home allocation, our choices are the standard method or the proration method. We've got hyperlinks built into the file, or you can navigate along the bottom of the page. So let's just go back and correct this to show the actual information from this project. Our units are not comparable, and we're starting from the home investment. So our only option is the standard method, which we'll explore in greater detail in the next tutorial.